Showdown at Warg-Tooth Crossing, Chapter 13. Kale walked down the street to the source of the noise, which turned out to be Conrad's general store. Another loud crash was heard, and then Conrad himself was thrown bodily from the building. 3 of the steel crew followed him out, with one holding his wife. One of them was Red. He was holding a bottle in his hand, which he promptly threw down the street, smashing it to bits that glittered red in the late afternoon sun. Then he picked up Conrad from the street and slapped him hard across the face. Before Kale could react, Eris ran forward to the band of thugs. He ran up to Red and held his arm as Red was about to slap Conrad again. Eris shouted, "Stop! What are you doing? You're hurting him." Red dropped Conrad, who slumped to the ground. His wife cried out, but was held cruelly in place by her assailant. Red grabbed Eris by the front of his robe. He was winding up to slap him when he noticed Kale walking up with his hand on his sword pommel. "Put him down," Kale said quietly. Red pushed Eris away, and the man holding Conrad's wife let her go as well. They moved to encircle Kale on the dusty street in front of the store. Both Eris and Conrad's wife helped Conrad up and then back to the storefront. Kale could see broken and scattered goods through the front, and Conrad's 2 children huddled inside, afraid to come out. No one else was on the street, though, and no one was coming out of the Toad. Kale canted himself towards Red, while keeping the man behind him, to his right, in view. He had to keep glancing over his left shoulder to watch the last man. They were all standing still, each about 10 feet away. Red grinned. "You know, Kale, I've been waiting for this for a long time." "Waiting for what?" Kale asked. "The chance to get drunk and beat up a storekeeper with 2 of your friends to help you, since you're too damn weak to do it yourself?" Red's grin left his face and was replaced with a snarl. "You think you're better than everyone here, don't you, Kale? You go around with your nose in the air like you're all high and mighty. Truth is, you're just like the rest of us. You kill when you're told and you make your money. Then you drink and whore just like the rest of us. Well, actually," Red paused to stroke his chin with his left hand, "not quite like me anyway. Quinn says I screw a lot better than you do. Just left her bow-legged this afternoon, as a matter of fact." Red grabbed his crotch while the other 2 laughed. Kale stiffened but didn't move. He took a breath slowly and said, "You've had your fun. How about you leave Conrad alone and go do your drinking somewhere else?" "Well now, Kale, I like it fine right here." Kale stared at Red, who glared right back. There was just a hint of wind, which carried the moans of Conrad's wife sobbing, but no other sounds were heard. The 4 all stood still, poised like coiled springs. Kale didn't like his chances against 3, even if they had been drinking, and he didn't know whether this would just be a beating or a killing. All 3 were fidgeting with their sword hilts, indicating the possibility of a deadly fight. But they also knew Kale's skill at arms, and even though they had the advantage of numbers and the artificial courage of drink, no one was in a hurry to get hurt or killed. But no one was backing down either. After Eris helped Conrad into the store, he came back out and walked up to Red. Kale yelled at him, "Eris, stay back!" But Eris strode with purpose to stand beside Red with arms crossed. Eris then waved a finger at Red and spoke, "I've had enough of this behavior. For too long, you and your crew have got drunk and made trouble for the peaceful people of this God's-forsaken town. I won't stand for it any longer. You will stop immediately." Red turned to look at Eris while still keeping an eye on Kale. "Or what?" he asked. Eris replied, "I have powers you can't possibly imagine." "You don't have jack shit," Red shot back and shoved Eris hard, knocking him to the ground. Kale leaned forward but stayed still, sensing the tension of the 2 men behind him to either side. Eris picked himself up, then lifting his hands, he started mumbling to invoke a spell. Red sprang towards him, and with his mailed fist backhanded the sage, snapping his head back and sending him sailing across the street to land with a lifeless thud. Kale jumped forward, and when Red saw him coming, he automatically drew his sword. Kale drew his sword in response and circled left to keep all 3 of his adversaries in sight. He looked over to Eris, who wasn't moving on the cold ground. Fury welled up in Kale, and he closed with Red, thrusting powerfully at his chest. Red gave way and parried Kale's sword barely, which creased the ringmail on the side of his chest. He countered, slashing at Kale, who repositioned, deflecting Red's slash and giving back one of his own. Kale continued pressing with repeated ferocious downstrikes, forcing Red further and further back from the onslaught. But Kale checked his assault when he saw motion out of the corner of his eye. The other two warriors were closing with him. Kale took one more swing at Red, more to force him back than to connect, then ducked from the swing of the left man's sword. Sensing the right man circling from behind, Kale stayed in, staying low, and connected with his shoulder into the man's chest. He felt the rogue's wind get pushed out of his lungs, and Kale threw him bodily to the ground. Having no time for niceties, Kale jumped over the prone form and kicked him squarely in the temple. The man lay still, and Kale turned to face Red and the left man. They were breathing hard and looked on with hatred. Red moved first, but the left man was less than a second behind. They coordinated their attack with Red swinging high, while the left man thrust low at Kale's legs. Kale was hard-pressed and barely bent backwards enough to avoid Red's swing, while simultaneously parrying left against the thrust. Steel clanged on steel, and Kale backpedaled to regain his balance, followed closely by the enraged fighters. They moved to attack again, but Kale pivoted around clockwise with a foot sweep, catching the left fighter stepping forward and tripping him to the ground. Kale carried through with his momentum and sliced his sword out to catch Red at mid-level. Red brought his own sword up to defend, but Kale's blade slipped along the edge, and it bit deeply into Red's shoulder. As Red staggered back, trying to staunch the blood from his wound, the man on the ground swung his sword at Kale, who had to jump up to keep his legs out of the cut. As Kale came down from the jump, he repositioned his sword point down and drove it through the man's chest. The fighter's eyes widened, and he coughed blood out onto his chest. Then he lay back dead. Kale removed his sword and looked down aghast at what he had done. Red's eyes were burning with rage as he looked from the fallen man to Kale, but instead of stepping in, he continued to hold his arm and instead yelled for help. Kale looked around frantically and realized the precariousness of this situation, especially having just killed a member of the steel crew. Without further thought, Kale ran past Red for the livery. Two of the crew came out of the livery to see what the shouting was about just as Kale ran up. Kale recognized them as Jarris and Pletz. They looked at him, then at Red shouting down the street, and the two men on the ground. They pushed him back as Kale tried to get past. Kale gave way and said raggedly, "Let me through, Jarris." "What the hell is going on, Kale?" Jarris asked. "What's going on with Red?" At this point, several men emerged from the Toad, and Red pointed them towards Kale. "Jarris, I've got to go right now or I'm dead." "Hey!" a shout came from down the road. While Jarris hesitated, Kale surprised him and Pletz by suddenly pushing past into the stable. Kale looked around frantically and saw Raider, but of course he was unsaddled. Kale quickly looked at the other horses to see if any of the other ones were saddled, but none were. Options fading quickly, Kale turned to the open door of the stables to see Jarris and Pletz coming in with several others running up behind. Kale resolved to not go quietly. He backed up till he felt the rear wall behind him and lifted his sword up. As more men came into the stable, two of them lifted bows to point sharpened arrows at Kale's heaving chest. He looked them all over, men he had ridden into danger with and who he had fought with, and now they wore hardened expressions. Red could be heard outside going on about how Kale had attacked him and killed Doug, maybe Eli too. More steps were heard coming to the livery, and the men parted to allow Barth to walk in. "What's going on, Kale?" Barth asked. "Just thought I'd go for a little ride," Kale answered, breathing heavily. "I see. And you thought you'd kill Doug along the way?" "Didn't mean to." "Oh, well, I guess it's okay then." "They were beating the shit out of Conrad, and they might have killed Eris. I don't know. I was just trying to stop them," Kale explained. "I mean, it's not like anyone else was going to." Barth nodded his head and said, "I see." He looked Kale in the eye and didn't waver. "Kale, you and I know there's only two ways for you out of this stable. One is feet first, the others in custody. This wouldn't be the first time a Steel Crew member has killed another, but we're going to have a trial to do this right. A trial, eh, Barth? With Bull presiding as the magistrate, I suppose, according to the King's writ? That would be correct. Doesn't sound like much of a choice. I'm not going to argue with you, Kale. I'll just get Jack and Farrad to put 2 arrows into you. Now I know you're a smart man, Kale. Your call. Kale stared hard at Barth and at the shiny tips of the arrowheads in front of the top bows. Slumping his shoulders, he threw his sword down, and it thumped on the dirt floor of the stable with an awful finality. Kale put his hands over his head, and several of the men rushed in to grab him and take his dagger at the same time. His hands were tied roughly behind his back, and he was pushed through the open stable doors. Most of the denizens of the Toad and the rest of the town were out on the street, braving the cold to see what was going on. Kale was marched unceremoniously before them towards the jail. He saw Doug's body still lying in the street, but the other man he had kicked, Eli, was up and moving around. He couldn't see Eris anywhere. He was no longer where he had fallen. Kale didn't know what that meant. As his eyes wandered amongst the crowd, he found Quinn's. She met his gaze for a moment, then looked away, shaking her head. "You should kill him right now," Red screamed as they passed. "He killed Doug. He tried to kill me and Eli. Look!" Red held up his arm that one of the wound tenders was putting a bandage on. "Kill him!" "Shut your pie hole, Red," Barth spoke out. "You'll have your time to talk at the trial. Someone see to Doug there." The company of men holding Kale came to the jail, and he was rudely shoved into the same cell he had been in before. The bars clanged as the lock latched, and the men slowly filtered out. Barth told Jack to remain at the jail while he hung the key up, then came over to Kale. "Boy, you sure do have a funny way of stirring things up, don't you?" Barth sighed. "Reckon I do," Kale answered as he sat on the cot and put his head in his hand. "Way I figure it, you should have left a while ago. You're probably figure right. Little late for that now." "Yep. Can I ask you a question, Barth?" "Shoot." "I imagine you've been with Bull and the Steel Crew since the beginning." "Thereabouts. That's your question?" "No. You started as a mercenary band fighting for the king. Now you run Somat and kill settlers if they get in your way, or at least let them be killed. You strike me as a professional man-at-arms. What do you think of what Bull's doing?" Barth pulled a chair over and set it down next to the bars backwards. He spoke quietly with his arms draped over the backrest. "To tell you the truth, Kale, it's not exactly what I thought I'd be doing, but this is the way things are. So what I think of what Bull's doing don't mean too much." Kale nodded. "I guess not." "I guess not." "Barth, what's going to happen to me?" Barth stood up and grabbed the chair. "Bull ain't too happy with you, Kale. I think you've made it easy for him. For what it's worth, I think it's a shame. You're a damn good man in a scrap." Kale looked up at Barth. "Thanks." Barth nodded, then put the chair back across the room. He gave Jack some instructions and left the building. Kale sat on the cot, rubbing his left shoulder. It was still stiff from the wallop he'd taken from the scaly a while back. The light slowly got dimmer as the sun went down, and Jack lit a few candles and stoked up the fire. It didn't warm the room much where the cell was. Eventually the outside door opened, and Quinn walked in carrying a tray. She looked at Jack and said, "Supper for the prisoner." Jack nodded, half asleep, and Quinn walked over to the cell. "Just like old times, eh, Quinn?" Kale said, standing up to move to the bars. "Just like old times, Kale," Quinn agreed as she pushed the tray through the grating. Kale took the tray and sat down on the bed. Despite feeling pretty hopeless, he was surprisingly hungry. "Do you know if Eris is okay?" he asked while taking a mouthful of soup. "Thankfully, yes, although he took quite a hit. One of the girls is seeing to him. He's resting back at his house." "Oh, thank the gods. I thought he was a goner there." "He's pretty tough for a city boy." Quinn sat quietly while Kale ate. The only sounds were his chewing, the crackling of the fire, and Jack lightly snoring. Presently she asked, "Why did you do it, Kale?" He pushed the empty bowl away and asked, "Do what?" "Kill Doug, for God's sake." God's sakes. "I didn't set out to." Red and them had been drinking and were roasting Conrad and his family. "I was just trying to put a stop to it. It was enough, you know. I mean, those guys are always making life hell on the townsfolk." "They're a gang, Kale. That's what they do. Your gang. Not anymore, I reckon. No, probably not. Quinn sat with her hands in her lap. Quinn, I'm sorry I upset you earlier. I didn't mean... Don't worry about it, Kale. It's just hard knowing you gotta do what you do. I know. It's just, I've kinda grown to like you, and... Kale, just stop, Quinn interrupted. I've enjoyed my time with you, and you're definitely one of the good ones. But you've gone way too far this time. You've been riding Bull for a long time. Whatever times you guys go back to, that's all spent now. He's going to... Quinn stopped and put her hand in front of her mouth. Quinn, Kale, he's going to have you killed. I don't like it, but there it is. And if I look like I'm siding with you, he's going to make my life miserable too. Not that it's so great right now. You should get out of here, Quinn. How, Kale? Get on a horse? Ride the trail to a cluster by myself? This is my life, Kale. I chose it, and I'll live with it. Quinn got up, and Kale stood with her, reaching through the bars to take her arm. He said, Bull is just going to get worse. He says he's only collecting enough to retire and buy an estate, but I think he's going to keep going, using everything around him to get more power. I know, Kale. I've been around powerful men all my life. Quinn patted his arm and said, I have to go, Kale, for what it's worth, if there were anything I could do. Yeah, said Kale. Quinn kissed him on the cheek through the bars, then took the tray. She slipped out the door, letting in a cold draft, which briefly woke Jack up. He looked around to see all was secure, then fell back to snoring.